Good evening and welcome to Merit Watch tonight. My name is David Craig. Happy Friday. It is, we are moving into the long weekend. I hope you got some great plans. Hope the weather's going to be good for you wherever you're watching from across Canada. I'm going to be joined here in a couple minutes by a friend of the show, Kirk Lubimov, who is a political and economical commentator and he's got some great insights. We're going to be talking a lot about the cabinet appointees, President Donald Trump's trip through the Middle East. We're going to dive into the history and how some people view that as a win, but also some people view that as Trump getting played from another perspective. So it'll be interesting to dive into that. I think there's a lot we can learn. One thing I want to focus on and highlight on, which is really important, which I will ask Kirk his thoughts as well. But as citizens, as Canadians, what is your response? What is your thought when you heard, maybe you didn't hear and you're hearing it right now for the first time, when Mark Carney and his Liberal government said there will not be a budget. There will only be a fall economic statement, which is going to come out in September, but there is no budget. No budget proposed. We're not going to see a budget right now. What are your thoughts on that? I think that all of us should be extremely concerned. I think this is a complete departing from what he ran on of he's an economist and you should trust him and he knows best. In the eyes of citizens, we need fiscal transparency. We need to be able to have this honest conversation and to see, guess what, where your tax dollars are going, where my tax dollars are going, where are they going to be allocated? What does it look like? Are we going to continue down what we have been for 10 years of increased spending, of larger debt where we can't even manage the payments on the debt, where it's pulling away from us and all the services that we need? Are we going to continue down that and make it worse, or are we going to change? That's a very important thing. But we'll ask Kirk that in just a moment when he does join me. Lots of else to get through in terms of all the things that's happened this week. But stick with us. We'll be back right after this break. Well, welcome back to Merit Watch tonight. It's great for you guys to be with us as well. I want to welcome a friend to the show, Kirk Lubimov, who has been with us several times before. He's a political and economic commentator. He's got some pretty interesting opinions if you follow him on X, and we'll get to that in a moment. But Kirk, thanks for joining me today. How are you?
My pleasure. How are you doing, sir?
We're doing good. Every day, it's fun being able to follow how what's happening in our country and the world politics, and also in the culture of Canada. I want to get your take on a couple of things because we're about 2.5 weeks now past the election, and Mark Carney has had time to form government, get his cabinet rolling, and there's been some interesting appointees within there. There's been a continuation of past cabinet ministers from Justin Trudeau's cabinet, but also several new ones. Just if you don't mind, and I don't think we've actually had, you and I have connected since the election. What is your take so far, just generally, on Mark Carney as the Prime Minister and the Liberal government and how they've been in the first couple of weeks?
Well, it's been an interesting cabinet selection, right? It seems, Mark Carney is not a team builder, right? And, people have sold him as an economist, as a pragmatist. He tried to use whatever buzzwords possible through the election to make him sound logical, which was essentially the key of him to being elected, standing up to Donald Trump as he tried to sell himself. We know now he removed most of the tariffs response against the U.S., so essentially don't have anything against them except clothes, coffee, and orange juice. And so he put together a team with the core cabinet is the exact same team from Trudeau's era, from Trudeau's government. They're just sitting in a little different places because they were so awful. Now, the weird part about the other half of this election, there was 28, I believe, ministers now and 10 secretaries, which is a little unusual, but probably more common across the pond in England. He picked probably the least competent people for those selection, and I'm really not sure why. This is the mystery question. The housing minister was an ex-mayor from Vancouver who promised in 2008 to end homelessness and housing unaffordability, and 7 years later essentially blamed it on climate change. His failure. So it's really bizarre. So the first couple weeks since turning the cabinet has been a total disaster for the party, just because all the ministers are essentially confused or just don't really know what they're doing in their role.
One thing I want to pick up on as well, I believe this is a newer role in terms of is it called Minister of Artificial Intelligence,
You know,
AI?
AI, yeah, Evan Solomon.
Yes, exactly. And I wanted to draw a little comparison. If you look at who President Donald Trump has consulting for him in this area, and the man is David Sachs, I'm referring to, who is a big tech investor. He's on the cutting edge of what's happening with AI, with technology, quantum computing. That was the very interesting thing to me of noticing in the team that Mark Carney is putting together, and you mentioned he's not a team builder, and in terms of trying to get the best foot forward for Canada, you want the most competent people in those positions. That is your inner circle. That's your crew that should at least be familiar with the area they're moving. They should be able to be innovative. At the very least, they should be able to lead and be able to garner people to come around and move forward in those areas. You made mention of the housing, the Minister of Housing. I made mention of the AI. There's several other positions that are the same as Justin Trudeau's. So for me, it's shaping up. What are we seeing different? Like, are we going to see anything different moving forward? Or is it the same old? Or are we even taking a step back? Thoughts?
Yeah, the AI one, I think that's probably the most incompetent selection he could have possibly made for any portfolio there, which is kind of interesting. One of my criticism of the conservative platform was they didn't use enough emphasis towards AI
Hmm.
and really broke it down what they mean by it. The Mark Carney's platform actually did a really good job of it. There was quite a few entries for AI. There was a select associated budget with it. They're planning to use it to cut some of the government bloat. It was right in his budget. And then to turn around and put someone that has absolutely zero subject matter expertise in one of the most important portfolios, really going forward economically, socially, development wise in general, attracting capital, data centers, which all power this new technology, is absolutely astonishing. It almost makes no sense. And like you said, the U.S. version of this role, which is David Sachs, he's one of the early founders, co-founders and workers of PayPal, eBay. He's an early investor in Uber. A lot of leading tech that we use every single day. Like this guy lives, breathes, and
Yeah.
thinks about AI and eats from AI
Yeah,
literally
exactly.
every day.
Yeah.
And we somehow put up a washed-up journalist in that role, which makes no sense.
Can you explain to us, because I know you've got your hands in this area and you're on the forefront of it too. The reason why I brought up AI, and this ties to investment no longer coming into Canada. I know weekly you've been putting reminders on your X saying, and no new investment coming to Canada.
Yeah.
And if you look at the economy and how important the economy should be looked at and treated, you can just look at any of the stats over the last 10 years and how we are moving backwards as a country economically and several other areas. But with the emergence of technology, AI, quantum computing, the amount of money and wealth that can be generated and created, and also the possibility, not just for jobs, but to move forward Canada in this area, which could be a major turnaround for us. This should be an area of focus. Goes just explain to us the potential that is there in the technology sector and why it's detrimental. Where really doesn't seem like we're putting a lot of energy into it.
Yeah. So there's two things, right? So let's look at the U.S. as you brought up the example. Under Donald Trump so far, until in 5 months he's been in, the U.S. has attracted just over $2-3 trillion
That's
in
right.
new investment. I would say 70% of it has to do with AI. So they're moving cheap manufacturing, semiconductor manufacturing into the U.S. They're trying to build that up. Essentially, there's only two companies that are building it in Taiwan, and then China took over from an executive from the same factory, walked
Yeah.
across the pond and opened a new semiconductor factory for China. So, because it's a national security issue as well. So they are attracting massive amounts of capital from that side.
Hmm.
Nvidia, Apple, um, everyone is essentially Amazon is building data centers and investing in AI. So and it's organic capital, right? Um, so there is billions of dollars in stakes, and this is something Alberta is actually working really hard to attract because those data centers are energy hungry. The U.S. does not have enough energy to power what they're building. So they need energy badly. And one of the huge potentials for Canada is to actually build data centers for those companies and be partnering with them because we have massive amounts of energy here that
Yeah.
the US needs. And this is such a lost opportunity right now into, putting someone that has absolutely is clueless on this portfolio, while this is the major capital attractor into the North American markets right now. So, and it's completely transformation, right? AI is um, AI is a productivity unleasher for every single industry. So we're going to be changing lots of how industries work, uh, how many things we discover them, from material science to everything. So not participating in this industry is such a huge loss for our future, because otherwise, if we want to access the technology in the future, we will need to be renting it from someone as a service.
It sounds like there's almost an idea of killing two birds with one stone as you're talking about energy and the fact that we obviously have a lot of work to do there with Canada to be able to unleash that. But there's a way that killing two birds with one stone, you have the energy and building those data centers and helping that grow
Mhm.
in Canada. Quick question for you. What are your thoughts on the non-budget announcement? The fact that it doesn't look like we're getting a budget soon, does that concern you? What do you think?
Well, it's the first time we're not going to have a budget essentially since the Great Depression. I think it should
Okay.
concern everyone, right? It's quite a disrespect to taxpayers, especially from someone who just sold himself as an economist through the whole campaign, and we don't know what's happening with our money. There's the least amount of transparency happening with our capital right now. So we're as close as we get to taxation without representation in Canada as we ever had.
Yeah, that's something I know Franco Terrazzano has been talking about as well, is that we've been moving away. And you would think from someone who ran on the idea of and literally saying, I'm an economist, essentially trust me what we're doing. This fiscal transparency and the fiscal responsibility, that's the number one step in reporting to citizens what our money and how it's being used and what it's going to look like. So it's not a good first look. I know they mentioned in September it's not going to be a budget, but I forget the terminology
The
now they
full
used
economic statement.
there, the statement, but still no budget
Yeah.
planning on for this year.
So let's remember this is the last full economic statement was started the collapse of the Trudeau government. Uh,
Okay,
the Trudeau, Chrystia Freeland was the finance minister. Trudeau tried to fire her over
that's right.
essentially over a Zoom call. She didn't want to table the budget because she's like, I'm done. You
Yeah,
obviously
that's right.
kicking me out, right, for Carney. Uh, and that's when Karina Gould came in, dropped it at the House of Commons, and left. And there was no debate or dialogue on it, which is
Mhm.
probably one of the most undemocratic points in decades in Canada's
Wow.
history. And that's essentially what was the ending part of the Trudeau's government.
The thing I'm concerned about generally, though, with the amount of people that voted for Liberals and the amount of I was talking with a guest a couple days ago with demographic split in our country in terms of a rise of conservatism, the philosophical side in terms of young people emerging that way, and you have the polls show and also the results. Boomers typically lean towards liberals with as the liberals put the threat from Trump and down south. But I have a concern that people aren't going to care enough about this type of thing. Is that citizens just are like, oh, okay, well, we'll wait because whether there is that trust factor, whether they want to give it a couple years, but I don't think we have that amount of time to actually wait to see if there's change coming. Thoughts on that?
Yeah, the unfortunate part is the average citizen is financially illiterate especially when it's got to do with any government fiscal activity. A lot of people point to they think conservative will cut this and that, which they never have, and they think the liberals are giving them this and that for free, and someone else will pay for them. The reality is, we're all paying for it, and Mark Carney's platform is going to be adding, a couple $100 billion in deficits, and the issue is the cost to carry the deficit is growing,
Yeah.
and in a couple of years we're going to be close to, this year we're going to be almost $60 billion a year in just debt servicing and charges. That means taxpayers are paying $60 billion a year, not for services, but just to carry the debt that they think is giving them free services.
Yeah.
In 5 years, it's going to be almost $100 billion. So we are now Canada's debt servicing cost is now surpassing our GST
Yeah.
revenue.
Wow.
So we have never been in a worse fiscal position uh, from a point of view of what we actually leaving to next generation.
And to break it down even more, what you're saying, just that people understand the amount of money that is, that's not 60 billion paying down our debt. That's simply covering the interest that our debt produces. So we're not even
Exactly.
paying anything down. We're just servicing the debt. And to put it in comparison, if you're spending $1 billion to build a new hospital, let's say, that's building a new hospital every single week for a year in Canada. That's a state of the art hospital. That's money we aren't building on infrastructure, money we're not spending on services for Canadians, things that can actually help Canadians. It's just being gone. A couple minutes, I want to ask you this last question here, because President Donald Trump has been on a tour through the Middle East. He's visiting Qatar. I say Qatar. I like that better than Qatar. Saudi Arabia. You know, he's been making his rounds. You mentioned earlier the investment that has been coming in. I was looking at it from the perspective of United States first, look at what he's drumming up for revenues, for business, for partnership with other countries to put America first and to work towards the economic solutions that they are. I actually thought, from my perspective, it looked like a pretty successful trip. You had an interesting thought just before we were filming that I'd love for you to expand upon. What are your thoughts on his trip? The reason I wanted to bring it up, because Canada, we've always talked about this, needs to have a Canada first focus in terms of building Canada. And we've had the opposite for the last 10 years. So what can we learn from the trip, but also give us your insights on how you think it went?
Yeah, so there's three aspects to essentially to this Middle East trip by Trump. One is the investment that they're obviously getting from the Arab world, um, which is particularly more from the Arab world than anywhere else.
Mm-hmm.
The political win that he thinks he's getting,
Okay.
and then there is what the actual cultural win is for the Arab world. So there's a couple of deals that have been done. So there, there's the United Arab Emirates, there's the Saudi Arabia. Um, those countries are very progressive. They've learned not to be, they're not falling into this terrorism, rhetoric. They're trying to move on from it and trying to
Okay.
have a balanced society as much as possible. Obviously, it's still an extremist society compared to what we have in North America. Um, they they took in over $100 billion of new weapon sales.
Okay.
So the question is, why does Saudi Arabia needs over $100
Yeah.
billion in new weapons? So there's a lot of strategy in play in the Middle East, and culture and symbolism more than anything is one of the most important things there.
Hmm.
So Qatar, one of the things there is, um, so one of the biggest destabilizer country in the Middle East is actually Iran and Qatar.
Mm-hmm.
So they're both major terrorist sponsors, especially Iran. Uh, but Qatar has, in the last 10 years, just because they got so much oil and gas revenue, they start playing that same role. Remember, a lot of the Hamas leadership went
That's
to
right. Yep.
Qatar. Um, so Qatar offered the plane to Trump for free.
That's
This
right.
is the exact same plane that one of the terrorist sponsor masterminds used to fly around on.
Okay.
So, and Trump is thinking this is a win. I'm getting a $400 million used plane, which they actually tried to sell and couldn't sell. But
Okay.
that doesn't matter. The news, it didn't really hit the news for most people, which is fine. But to them, it's like, look, this guy is flying in our chariot.
Hmm.
To them, it's a win. And now he went there and shook everyone's hand.
Because of the symbolism you're saying behind that.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay.
So for them, this is a huge win. And they obviously at the end of the day we want peace in the Middle East and everything to be stabilizing, and I think the Emirates want to do it, Saudi Arabia, and the interesting part is that the Syrian government came into play here again. So Saudi Arabia and UAE just actually paid off the IMF debt of Syria.
Wow. Okay.
Um, and let's remember, Syria was just toppled by what Canada recognizes as a terrorist group. So there is literally a terrorist leader that's not democratically been elected, right? They just kicked out the other guy, and the head of the terrorist group of the new is the new president there until they'll have election, I think, at some point.
Yeah.
So that country has become more radical and Islamic as there's a lot of turnovers happen in the Middle East more than ever. There
Yeah.
have been a lot of persecution of Christians, of Druze, of a lot of other minority groups in there. They've been slaughtered for the last couple of months. But they're trying to say, let's forget all about it. This is our new guy, and essentially Turkey and some of the other countries have backed that rebellion. So I think Trump thinks this is a win. We're going to see what it will look like. There's
Yep.
no question that Saudi Arabia is trying to modernize. They have a huge amount of wealth that they're trying to reinvest from oil into other industries. They need to diversify. They see the writing on the wall. So is the other countries. But Qatar, which most of their labor is actually foreign labor, foreign slave labor.
That's right.
So for them, it's a total different outlook on what they're trying to do. Qatar is really trying to position themselves as a power player. Now, what a lot of people maybe not know is Qatar is also, and Iran are big sponsors of the Muslim Brotherhood, who is active into U.S. and there's just been foiled arrest of attack on a U.S. Army base by an ISIS guy into
Yep.
U.S. by the FBI, and they've been openly funding a lot of the rebellion and pro-terrorism cheerleading that you see in the different schools into U.S.
Yeah. Interesting.
So it was a really interesting trip because it was like Trump was oblivious to everything that's actually happening from the same people he was shaking their hand back in his own country, and everything is actually campaigned against them.
Well, one of the things, and I got to wrap you right away, Kurt, but one of the things that I thought was there's a line I saw, I forget who said this, but he is brokering peace through prosperity, and this idea of trying to get everyone to prosper together, which will bring peace across. I'm not sure if that idea is going to work. And as you brought some really interesting insights from their perspective in terms of the symbolism that's coming with it. So I wonder if that's a dead end and it's a temporary thing. Like you said, we'll see how it plays out. There was an interesting article written by the Free Press in the States, which is Barry Weiss, and one of our friends, Rupa Subramania, who's been on with us several times. They wrote about how Qatar bought America and their process through the fundings of universities to key people who do speak, and they've got big personalities and so on and so on.
Yeah, there was an article from a few years ago that they bought like 200 like massive influencers.
Yes.
Tucker Carlson is funded by them. There's a lot of other people, which that's why you see them platforming, normalizing Qatar, even though at the other side of it, they want the exact opposite for the U.S. Right? It's all about dominance at the end. The differences for that part of the world in North America is, in North America we think in 4-year terms. In that part of the world, can be patient. They'll wait 40, 50 years, just like China.
Yeah. Yeah, it's that's great insights, Kirk. The one comment I want to make is that I brought that up because I liked how Donald Trump and what he's trying to do in terms of bringing investment money focus into America. And I think that's something we as Canadians can learn from and as citizens. You've talked about this lots and extensively. The fact that we need to be able to build an attractive environment that people want to invest, that you've got the Jensen Huangs and you have the Tim Cooks and you have the big guys in the world who want to build and work with your country and get rid of the bureaucracy and the red tape that is hindering that. And anyways, we'll see if that plays out. But again, we got to wrap. Kirk, thank you so much for your time, man. Appreciate it. We're going to have you on again.
Anytime. Thank you.
All right. We'll be back right after this. Well, we're back with Merit Watch tonight. As you can see, there is a lot to unpack with the trip that President Donald Trump had to the Middle East, as there's multiple perspectives on what it's like. And I want to highlight as well, there's a great article by the Free Press and Barry Weiss and her crew about how Qatar is buying America, the money that they have generated from their wealth, from their sovereign wealth fund, from oil and gas and their energy, where that's being allocated, because there's multiple perspectives when you look at geopolitics. But the point I wanted to highlight is this idea of Canada. Where we currently are at, there has to be an emphasis and a massive focus on bringing investment to Canada, building infrastructure to help the economy, to help money churn in Canada, and to be attractive to the world's biggest companies so that Canada can continue to move forward and grow. Lots to talk about, but guess what? It is weekend time, so enjoy your weekend. Have a great long weekend. We'll see you back here on Monday.